So in this video, we're moving on to the next chapter. We're going to talk about functions. So I mentioned in one of the previous videos that there are some things in programming that share a name with things we've done in mathematics, and functions are one of those. But functions in programming languages are not the same as functions in mathematics. They don't have the same properties, okay? So a function in a computer programming sense is like a series of statements that we're going to give a name to allow us to repeat it more easily. Okay. So if you have something like a calculation that takes a lot of steps that you have to do a lot, rather than do that calculation every time, you're just going to do it one time. Okay. And that's going to be it. So I'm going to be able to say something like, salary, get over here where I'm in the right place, is equal to calculate salary. And then send it some, ID or whatever we send it. Okay. So I wouldn't have to create this code here. It would be somewhere else in our code. Okay. So that's the basic idea behind functions. So the functions allow our programs to be a lot more modular, okay, which helps us in many ways. The code becomes simpler. We don't have to do the same thing over and over and over again. We can define functions that we can reuse in other programs, which makes it easier to deal with. We can test those functions so that we know that they work, so we don't have to retest them every time. The development's faster and easier, and it's just more straightforward. Okay. It also allows you to work with the teammates in that you can assign different tasks or different functions to different people. Okay. So there are two basic styles of functions. The first are called void functions. Okay, and they basically they do something, and that's it. Okay, they print something out or something like that. And then we have value returning functions. Okay, and they return something. Okay, and we've seen some functions already. For example, the range function. Okay, range 3. It's going to return a list of 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so that's a function that's a value returning function. So we're going to be able to write our own functions that do that. Okay. So we're going to start with the idea of a void function as a little more straightforward to do. Okay. So a void function doesn't return anything. It just does something. Okay. Often what void functions do, they're print functions, or they often do printing. Okay. I have kind of a golden rule that I use in programming. A function should not print anything unless printing is all that it does. Okay, and we'll see what I'm talking about as we go along. Okay, but these void functions. Okay, so we're going to define these in code with the def keyword. Okay, we then give it a function name. Okay, and then a colon. So like other thing, and has to have parentheses. Okay, like other things in Python, is it really a colon? That's a colon. Like other things in Python, the name can begin with any of the letters A through Z, small a through small z, or an underscore, and that's it. The name itself after a beginning can include numbers. Okay. Case is distinct, so uppercase and lowercase are different. So if you have two functions with the same name but different letters, different capitalization, they're different functions. Okay. So after we do that, we're going to go down and have whatever our statements are. There could be one or more of those. Okay. So let's do an actual example here. We're going to create a function called message. Okay. Takes nothing, but it's going to print. It's going to print out, I am Arthur. Print out King of the Britons. Lots of quotes in this section from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because the Python language is named not after the snake, but after Monty Python, the comedy troupe. Okay. So I know that I'm done defining it because of the indentation. So the spacing is such that any line that's indented over is part of the function. Anything that's not is not. Okay. I can then call this just by saying message. Okay. If I do that, it works. Okay. Note, since we're dealing with an interpreted language, I have to define it before I can call it. Okay. When I do that, oh, interesting. This is a problem with, not a problem. It's a, I guess it's kind of a problem with Google Colate or Colab. Since I've already done it, it knew it was there. Normally you have to put it beforehand. So that would be in PyCharm, that would be an error, but it won't be. That's gonna bite us a couple times today. We'll talk about that. Okay. But you can do it more than once. Do it as many times as you want. And it will keep printing it out. Okay. So if you need to print that out a lot, and certainly that would be a way to do that. Okay. So when you're looking at how this function actually operates, so it's going to start, the interpreter starts at the beginning every time. We don't compile, we interpret. That's a comment we ignore, comment we ignore, comment we ignore, comment we ignore, blank space we ignore. Here's the def. Okay. So it's making a note. Okay. I now know that message lives right here in memory. Okay. Here's what's there, but I don't care about that. I'm not going to do anything. So now when I see this message, I'm like, oh, I know where message is. It's going to do it. Okay. Note that if I didn't call the function, it's not an error. Just nothing happens. See, it doesn't do anything because I didn't ask it to. Okay. If we have more than one function, this is getting into something that we're going to start doing in class. And that's the idea of a main function. Okay. So if I define a main function up here, and this is going to be a print, I have a message for you. Okay. I'm then going to call the message function. Okay. Then I'm going to print goodbye. Okay. That's all we're going to do. Okay. So we can have multiple functions there. That's fine. But at some point, we have to call our main program. Okay. And what we're going to do from here on out with all of our code, even if the program doesn't say, unless there's a good reason not to, every program we do is going to have a main function. Okay. I think that's a good way to organize. And it's moving us towards C++, where everything has a main function. Okay. So you do it normally, even with this one function, you'll do a def main, and you have to have this main at the bottom. If you find your program gives no errors but does nothing, make sure that you called main at the end, because sometimes you don't. Okay. So now when I run this, it's going to do this. Okay. So again, it's going to ignore things down to here. It's going to say, oh, here's a main program. I know where that's at. It's going to come down here. Oh, here's the message function. I know where that's at. Now it's going to run main. So it starts running this line, this line. Oh, I know about message. It's there. And then it's going to print that. Then it goes back from the message, it's going to print these. Then it comes back to here and prints the last little bit. Okay. So that's how those work. Okay. So when we're doing flowcharting, we talked about flowcharting here a bit. When we flowchart, a function is basically just a different section of a different flowchart. Okay, we can put it in a different area, and then we can go from there. Okay. So that there's a pretty big example in the textbook on this. Dryer Corporation has all kinds of different messages. Okay, so we can certainly go through that. One thing that it gives us here, which could be kind of interesting, we haven't done this before, is if you want the user to have to press a key to continue. And for that, we just do an input. And they do it as part of the bigger program, but it's worth highlighting here. Press enter to continue. Okay. Whatever you want to say. The input doesn't really do anything, but it stops and asks the user, seems to be, but doesn't do much with it. So if we do this, it basically would do that, press enter and continue. There you go. Okay. So that's one thing you can do there. So this next bit gets pretty interesting, and it's about the idea of local variables. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep this there. Okay, so this is our basis for starting our program now. Okay, so the idea of a local variable means that when a variable is created inside of a function, you can only get to it inside of that function. Okay, and again, because of the nature of the way Google Colab works, it will sometimes have a value for those variables when it shouldn't. Okay, but in general, that's how it should work. So if we have this function, here's our get main. We're going to do another function here before we write that called get name. Okay. The get name function, we're going to say name is equal to input, enter your name. Okay, that's all it does. And now up here, we're just going to call this name function. We're going to say get name. Okay. Then we're going to say print name. Okay. Easy enough. So what we hope is the name gets set here, but now it knows what it is. We run this, enter your name. We see we have an error. Okay, it doesn't know what name is. It's because name was ran down here or was defined down here. It doesn't have any meaning up here. Okay, so yeah, that's the error. Name is not defined. Okay, so what we create inside of the functions tends to be available only in those functions. Okay, unless you return something, and we'll talk about returning later. Okay, what we're going to talk about next, though, is the idea that you can pass things into your functions. Okay, and that way that makes our function a lot more useful in many ways. Okay, so let's say we're going to create a function called double it. And it's going to take a number. Okay. And since we don't know how to return a value yet, well, no, let's just talk about it. Let's not wait. Okay, so I can do two things. I can say num is equal to 2 times num, and then do a return num. That's one possibility. Okay, or I could just return the 2 times none directly. Okay. So now to call this, it has this parameter num. I have to include something there. Okay, so I have to say double it num. Okay, but this is going to return that number. So I'm gonna have to call it something else. Okay, I'm gonna have to say like, and that's gonna be a value. So let's say that num is equal to 5. Let's call it something different, just so we can know these are different. Okay. And now I'm going to say, I could print it. I could do that. I could print double it number. Okay. And again, we're going to call main to get it going. So let's try this. Okay, number was 5. There we go. We're setting it at 5. Okay. We could say is equal to int input, enter number. Okay. Now it's going to ask in our number 10, it prints out 20. Okay. So we're passing along the number that we've entered, this number. It's called num down here. It's returning double of that number. That's all it's doing. Okay. And what you don't want to do, you don't want to print. The double it function should not do any printing at all. It's doing calculations. It's not doing printing. It's a lot more flexible to return that back to here. Okay. So I could then do something instead. I could say something like D for double equals double it of number. Okay. And now I can do something with D, whatever I want to do. So now I can print number something like that. Okay. And again, that would work as well. Okay. So you don't want to print the number in here because then you're stuck with how it looks. Okay. So if you try to call this with no parameters, it'll give us an error. It was expecting some parameter. Okay. If you're going to call it with more than one parameter, okay, so going to give you an error. Okay, so it expects just that. Okay, you can have that. You can do a num1, num2 if you want. That's okay. In which I could do a number 7. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but that would have to be a num1 now. That's certainly okay. So that works still. Okay, we're not using it very well, but you can do that. Okay, so you can pass as many arguments as you want. Not really any limit to that. Okay. So the book has some examples of that. You can do that. It's not a problem. Okay. If we send something to the function, like we're doing here, if the parameter changes, which it did, well, actually it's not. If I did something like num2 is equal to 3, okay, it doesn't have any effect once we get back out to main. Okay, so the changes you make to the parameters only are affected in this current version. Okay. So when you're doing multiple parameters, the order matters. Okay, so if I'm going to write a function, let's see. Distance. I'm going to send it a rate. I'm going to send it a time. Okay. Then I just say return rate times time. Okay. That's all we're going to do. That's straightforward enough. But if I have my rate being equal to 30 miles an hour and time being equal to 2 hours, okay, if I do distance, time, rate, okay, it doesn't know what those words mean. Okay, so that is going to, the time will be rate and the rate will be time. If that makes sense. Okay, so if I were to go down here and violate my own rules just for the test, if I were to print, what's the time? Okay, the time should be 2, but you see when I print, it prints out the 30. Okay, so these have to be in the same order. The other thing that you can do is through the keyword arguments. Okay, I don't really like keyword arguments, so we're not going to talk about that much. Okay, you can look at that if you like, but I think that it's not something that I think it's not good code. I think your code should be in the order, the parameters should be the order that you call them. And that's the best way to go. Okay. And that's what we're doing for this particular video, right? We're going up through 5.5 in the textbook. Okay. So there'll be some homework problems on Monday in class. So make sure that you think about this idea of a function. Okay. And again, functions, if I'll take that out where it's violating it, function should not print unless they're just printing. That's all they're doing. Okay. We had void functions, which just do something. They don't return anything. Then we can return something from a function with the return keyword. And those are the value producing functions. Okay. We can also send parameters into the function, which is important. Okay. So the other thing to remember is from our programs from now on, they're going to need this main function. Okay, so whatever program we've done before, we can just add this def main before it and call the main at the end, and then that will take care of that. Okay, so yeah, let me know if you have questions.